If you are somebody who is struggling with their relationship and you turn to the internet to go, am I the only person who hates my husband now? Oh my gosh, it's terrifying. Literally, if you go, couples that break up after having a baby, Google's AI summary says, yep, 1 in 5 couples break up after having a baby.
Whoa, that's shockingly high.
That is shockingly high. I did a little bit of digging with that because I was like, that is incredibly high. And as with all things on the internet, it is underpinned by really shit research.
Right. Good. You're listening to the Science Baby podcast with me, Kim.
And me, Leila.
We're two nerdy mums who have researched the crap out of parenthood.
Seriously, you do not want to see our Google search histories.
Each episode, we chat about the why behind pregnancy, birth, and everything that comes after.
Because babies don't come with a manual, but with one born every minute, we reckon we can figure it out. How are you, friend?
Yeah, good. It's a bit snotty, I have to say.
It's a lingerer, this one, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, how are you feeling?
Yeah, still, it's all in the back of the doodahs.
Stella keeps making noises like... because she doesn't understand why she can't, clear her...
Bless her.
herself.
Yeah.
And she's now developed, in the same way as a cat learns the sound of the flea treatment as you open it and then does a runner, Stella now knows what the snot sucker looks like. And so she immediately just evasive manoeuvres. She hates it.
She is limited by her undeveloped mobility, I suppose. Whereas take a toddler, and I cannot dress him. It is like wrestling a crocodile on a daily basis. We've taken to full-scale negotiations now. Do you want to see Nanny? Well, then you have to put your pants on.
Wow.
Do you remember what happened when you went out without your shoes? My feet were cold. I was like, well, what's going to happen when you go out without your pants? And he's like, I don't know. I was like, bum is going to be cold.
Your bum is going to be very cold.
We went to an adventure park last week because Doug had a week off, and we thought we would take a little bit of time pre-half-term madness to explore some of the opportunities that present themselves. And it was gloriously out of season, but I am covered with more bruises and strange, mysterious 40-year-old pains than I imagined were possible. There was, climbing frames and soft play and bouncy pillows, and there were owls to look at, and it was a wonderful day out, but good God, was it tiring.
Oh my Lord. I know, it's mad, isn't it? The outside.
The outside.
That sounds delightful, though.
Yes.
Very seasonal, very autumnal, very spooky season.
Yeah, it was very nice. It was very
Kids
nice.
love
So,
it.
yeah, still recovering from that with my creaky bones.
Yeah, I can attest. We went to Westonbirt Arboretum this week.
Ooh.
Oh, sorry, I should rephrase. The official name is Westonbirt, the National Arboretum.
Oh gosh.
Which is lovely, and as you can imagine, this time of year, being recorded in the
beautiful.
autumn, it is red and orange and lovely.
That's beautiful.
All the aces. So yeah, that was lovely. Just sort of went and just took a load of photos with the baby underneath various beautifully coloured trees, as you can imagine. But yeah, really lovely to be out and about in the wild. So yeah, woke up feeling like I'd run a marathon.
Fantastic. Yeah, obviously went out into the outside and stood up for more than 10 minutes. It's interesting that they boast the National Arboretum, because close to us we have the National Pineatum.
Is that a word?
Pine trees. It's like we can't have all the trees, we're going to have the pine trees.
It sounds quite passive aggressive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's like, well, we're the centre for pines. Which is great, but at this time of year it just looks the same as all other times of year, so not great, really.
Yeah, famously quite evergreen.
Quite nice in the winter, actually, because it gets quite spooky and foggy.
We've embraced nature this week. I think we should be very pleased with ourselves.
Very pleased with ourselves and deserve ourselves a good lie down.
Yes. Yeah. It's sad, isn't it?
Yep.
And also had quite a tetchy week at home, so this is a good thing to talk about.
It's good timing. Yeah, well, we've had, as I said, Doug's had a whole week off, and it has tested me.
He's there. He's still there.
He's actually been ejected from the house. He's in the park with a scooter right now. My child and the scooter, I should clarify.
I'm not here to judge. Doug can have a week off the way he wants it. If he wants to ride his child's scooter, that's fine.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about our relationships with our partners after having a baby. As I've come to understand, the human brain and interpersonal relationships are complex as heck. And it's not something that we can sort of put a label on. But I think if you speak to any new parent, it is quite a common experience for them there to be changes in a relationship after having a baby. Would you say that's fair?
I completely agree, yeah. And what has struck me more than anything is when having the conversations about how our relationships have changed, a lot of the changes, positive and negative, seem to be quite universal. Obviously, every relationship has its own idiosyncrasies, but I think the broader vulnerabilities that are brought to the surface when you have a baby feel to me to be quite common amongst my, and I should, probably stress that my peer group are probably all very much the same as me. They live in a wealthy Western society, and so I think it feels like there are some very common things that aren't talked about very much, that probably relate to the majority of couples who've just had a baby.
So what, if I dare sort of peek inside the Pandora's box of your tetchy week, give me a bit of context about sort of where your relationship came from through wanting a babies and getting one.
It's getting one off of Amazon. Yeah, our relationship has always been defined by fun and freedom. And I phrase it like that because obviously that the relevance in terms of later on having a baby should be very clear. So my husband Jake and I met sort of late 20s, early 30s. And so we had a number of years of enjoying the ultimate freedom. We lived in London. We were out and about seeing mates. And it was not stressy at all. We didn't commit particularly quickly. We only got married, sort of 9 years into our relationship. So we were under no rush to settle down, start a family, get serious about life, give up our freedoms, basically. And in fact, we were on the fence about having children up until the very last minute when we said, actually, biology is going to make this decision for us eventually. So do we want to try while we still can? And that is when we decided to try. And we would have probably left it another 10 years had we been able to, biologically, because we were just having so much fun. So that's the background against which we then decided to have kids. And we were very realistic about the fact that that was going to change, and that crucially we were making the decision to change that. This wasn't going to be a reality if we were lucky enough to have kids that was going to be thrust onto us, unwillingly. We were choosing to try and do this. So we kind of have to be realistic about it and the fact that it was going to change our lives. So I would say that we have wrestled with the changes. They haven't been a huge shock to us, but I think the reality of the changes you obviously don't realise until they happen. So we struggled with some more than we thought and struggled with some less than we thought, just because the reality is very different to the anticipation of the changes. So I think that is why we waited as long as we did, because we knew that freedom was going to be taken away from us, and we didn't really want it to be taken away.
That's interesting, actually, because in a lot of ways, my journey to parenthood is similar to yours, but also completely different. So Doug and I met when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. Again, Doug was a bit older, but he didn't behave like an old man or anything. He still did all the same sort of stuff that I did, and we clicked instantly, and we actually got married within 2 years of meeting. We'd both had a history of relationships, and I think we when you know, and we just clicked instantly. And again, our relationship was built on, as my mother has put it, hedonistically. And it is ultimately the word is hedonism. The best word is hedonism. You live for yourselves. You get to do what you want. You live for your own pleasure, and that's essentially what we did. We travelled. We did festivals. We ate out. We had a great time, just the two of us. And because we actually started trying to have a baby just after we got married, and I was happy to have a baby, but never really gave it a lot of thought. And so we carried on living our hedonistic lives and not really thinking about it, thinking it would happen eventually. And then the fertility journey ended up being so drawn out. What can you do? I don't want to fixate and, study pregnancy tests every day of the week. You just carry on living your life. And so before we knew it, 8 years had passed where we'd just had the two of us. And we'd really loved that. And then when I did fall pregnant, we were so excited. It's like, finally, we've achieved this thing that we've been trying for a long time. So we were extremely happy to be expecting a child. I suppose I never really reconciled what life as a parent would look like. I just kind of assumed it would be the same, but with another person in the house, which, when you think about it, is just outrageously naive.
But at the same time, the change is so all-consuming that I don't think it's possible to intellectually appreciate it until it's your reality.
No. And because I don't have any siblings, I didn't know many people with young children. A lot of my peers had children during COVID, so they were sort of getting out of the toddler years by the time we all emerged, if you like. So I didn't really know what it was to be a parent, other than just a sort of caretaker of a small person. And like you say, the magnitude of it is unfathomably large and complex, isn't it? Which has kind of, it's made me kick myself for being so naive, but also, how was I supposed to think about it? You're worrying about what wallpaper we're going to put in the nursery, but really you should be worrying about, how you're going to navigate a disagreement after none of you have slept for a week. Like, that is what you really need to be worrying about. But that's not something we ever think about in advance, really, is it?
No, and you can forgive the system, of kind of, baby education, antenatal classes, all of that stuff. You can forgive them for having a bit of a blind spot in this area because, of course, every relationship is different. It will stress and strain in different areas. So you can't cover everything. And this is an area where I feel personally like we've received really good care from the health visiting service in our area because they are always asking about us. We are first. The baby's fine. The baby's not sick. The baby's developing well. So how are you two? How are you, mum? How are you feeling? How are you guys communicating? Are you happy? Are you worried about anything? And I think that is incredible, but obviously that isn't universal across the UK. But it's something I wanted to draw attention to. And maybe it's the earliest opportunity, really, that you can start to get meaningful support in your relationship, because it's only after the baby comes that a lot of this stuff becomes apparent and where the issues are and where the issues aren't. Maybe that's an idealistic way of looking at it.
No, I think it's good. I think it's definitely good to check in. I felt with my health visiting team, I sort of had to present we had to present a united, optimistic front of like, everything's fine.
Oh,
don't take my child away.
Because we want an A star. We want 100% score, even though that isn't a thing.
So I didn't feel like I wanted to get into, or I felt like it wasn't important enough to bother them with, oh, well, we argued about this. But I think there is a tendency amongst people to try and put a brave face on stuff like that. And if things are going well, great. And if things are going not so well, are you going to tell this stranger who's in your house for an hour once I can't even remember how often it is, but every few months?
I mean, obviously, we're at slightly different stages, so I'm really interested to talk to you about this. So were there any elements that surprised you or that you feel would be useful to share about your relationship transformations since Felix was born?
Gosh, I mean, I think it's always good to get perspective from other people. That's been one of the best things in speaking to my peers and making friends that are at the same stage as me, of that social comparison of actually like, well, oh wow, you're going through that as well, so I don't feel so alone, or whatever it is. So I think it's always good to share, but also with the great big caveat that this is my experience and it doesn't need to be anyone else's. So when Felix was born, we were lucky that Doug was able to take 6 weeks off work. And I know that is definitely not the case for many fathers, but he managed to have 6 unencumbered weeks of just looking after kind of me and Felix. And that was great. It was actually kind of a little blissful newborn bubble that we really enjoyed. And, I was recovering from my C-section surgery, and Doug is best in a kind of support care role, which, I was very much appreciative for. The giant crumpets were brought to me every morning. He would see to all of the logistics in the house. So that was fantastic. I think that then immediately changed once he had to go back to work, because suddenly there is a new, you have to earn money. You have to give a part of yourself back to this company, to this external force, so that we can continue to exist as a family financially. So that kind of split his attention. And because of that, I was placed into the role of default parent, as happens in, I would say, the vast majority of cases. And I think if I look back, that's the kind of the foundation of many of the difficulties, the changes that we've faced, is that we have instantly and necessarily been partitioned into our different parental roles, to which I immediately resented, because we planned to co-parent. We always said, oh yeah, we will both bear 50% of the responsibility. But in reality, it just proved impossible, because Doug always, from the beginning, had this external force clawing at his attention. And I was always the milk, I was the milk giver, I was the comfort giver. I didn't have to be, but somebody had to be, and he wasn't there, so I picked it up. And over time, those parental roles have become reinforced. And for better or for worse, that has shaped our behaviours and our behaviour towards each other. And gosh, it's been 2.5 years. We've gone through so many different incarnations of it. But I think if you look at an overall kind of trend line in our relationship happiness, it has decreased over time. There's been a lot more disagreement. There's been a lot more low-level tension. There's been a reduction in actually just doing stuff together. Intimacy, fallen through the floor. Like, do not touch me, please. And that's a whole other thing to unpack. But
get out of my face.
Yeah, can you please stop breathing in the same room as me? Yeah. Gosh, it's way too complicated to unpack why we feel like that. But essentially, it has, it's ebbed and flowed. But in general, given how strong we were before, given how in sync we were before, it continues to surprise me how out of sync we are now. And gosh, I still love him, but good God.
If only he could breathe in a way that didn't make you want to punch him in the throat. No, we jest.
We do jest, but, it does come to that in the moment. And then you have to step back and think, why? Why has it come to this? And I do think, it's this other person, but it's not Felix's fault. It's not the child's fault. I read a brilliant line in a book the other day of, like, we talk about the moment a baby is born, two parents are magically created as well, because they were people before and now they're parents, and that's a different creature.
It's a good point, because to some extent we are a product of our roles in family, in society.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really good point, is that our identity changes irrevocably. And I think that's because our role changes irrevocably. So Jake and I have had exactly the same arc as you guys, I think. We have experienced both extremes since our daughter was born, in that we started off the newborn journey as better than we'd ever been as a couple, as a team. And I was like, oh my God, I love this person so much. Like, I can't believe we've ever had an argument. You're just perfect and amazing. And the crumpets you've just brought me, honestly, this is the greatest gift another human's ever brought me. And since then...
Objective truth, by the way.
Objective truth. Objective truth. And since then, of course, we have seen cracks develop in the weirdest, most fundamental parts of our relationship. And it's just so weird. And the extreme high and low that we have been through and are, going through, of course, and will, forever, I'm sure, to me are a reflection of the fact that since we have become parents, the stakes are so much higher on everything. Just the background of risk and reward is just so much more vibrant now that we actually have a real human being who we have to keep alive and happy in the house. I feel like that, to me, obviously in our unique, situation, has been why we've experienced the such extreme positive and negative aspects of that relationship transformation.
It makes a lot of sense. Like you say, the stakes are so high.
And I think one other thing that we have found ourselves doing, and that I'm sure may be a part of your and your husband's experience with going back to work, is I think a lot of the role discrepancies that we are continuing to experience since Jake went back to work full time are just a very valid and reasonable, and as you say, necessary form of aggressive boundary setting. Like self-preserving boundary setting, because of course they are then thrown into the workplace again, and they have to have at least a couple of brain cells available to that. And of course the process of having a kid is so all-consuming that they have to put a wall up and say, I can't be responsible for this percent of the childcare anymore because I physically do not have the RAM for it. But of course the way that you communicate that is never perfect, and so this very reasonable and useful process of setting boundaries and establishing roles and making it fair just occurs without anyone talking about it and everyone wondering why no one's doing the thing they used to do all the time.
And I feel like a lot of the way that people deal with that is through it's quite rigid boundary setting and like scheduling, which, you know, if there's anything is going to strip the romance out of a relationship, it's a schedule.
I mean, rules are very sexy,
Rules
but
are so
even
sexy.
we have limits.
No, but you might have you might have an arrangement where mum will have the baby until the very moment that the dad clocks off, and then dad will have them for an hour, and then mum will take them back for and it becomes a trade-off and a constant handover, and that is the beginnings of where logistics take over, and they just become all consuming. Because a child, one who cannot move, think, feed, clean themselves, is a constant logistic battle. And once you're trying to balance that logistics between two of you, I feel like there is no room for anything else.
No.
You have to kind of schedule in intimacy time, which is the least sexy thing in the entire world. I can tell you for a fact, a fertility journey where you have to schedule in your sex time is not the route to making a child.
No.
But also, even in the most simple sense, you know, if you say, okay, well, this is our hour that we can spend together, the two of us, you'll end up sitting on the sofa just like going, so, who are you?
Yeah. Oh, you're the guy that was breathing weird
Yeah.
6 hours ago.
And then there's the other aspect, which I find very debilitating, is the need for personal time as well. So when you've got the logistics that the looking after the child takes up pretty much all of your time, the rest of the time, you then feel a responsibility towards your partner. And you might love them, but also you know that giving them time means you get nothing for yourself.
Yeah.
Which, as part of the transformation to motherhood in general, and the feeling of the loss of the self that there was before, that can be a real kick in the teeth of like, yeah, you don't actually get any time to yourself.
Yeah.
And I've got to the point now, you know, at the moment, Felix is non-stop. I'm exhausted by the end of the day, and I don't even have time I don't have time for relationships or myself. I just go to bed. I go to bed at 8:30. It's miserable.
Yeah. It does feel like, whereas before, having, you know, intimate time, not necessarily sexual time, but like having an intimate one-on-one time with your partner was pleasurable and it was productive in that it built your relationship. Now it just feels like someone else needs something from you.
Yes, yeah.
It's a chore.
Honestly,
which is
yeah.
mad.
It's
But I mean,
bizarre, yeah.
but I think it's reasonable, and it's an important thing for that person to acknowledge, that is as much as we have to acknowledge, you know, you need your boundaries because you have to go back to work, or you know, for whatever reason. There must be an acknowledgement on your side that there is a constant requirement for your time and resources, and that it's not a reflection on them or your want to be with them. It sounds like we have really parallel experiences. Mums I've spoken to have also had very parallel experiences to this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are the stats? Because social research is always full of pitfalls because it's very difficult to do the numbers and the stats on humans. As you said, you know, people and relationships are very complicated and it's hard to unpick variables and make robust conclusions. But there has been some research on this, hasn't there?
Yeah, we do definitely fall into the trap of living in our echo chambers. And like you say, my peers are all going through similar things as well. You know, some of them have separated. And I'm like, oh, at least we're still finding a way through. But there's also a part of me that feels like, oh, well, that must be nice. No, and I don't mean that. But it is, you get to a point where you think, well, what is the best course of action here? But yeah, so we do fall into the trap of going into our echo chambers. And so it's good to kind of look at statistics that show us kind of what an overall experience is. Unfortunately, again, those statistics are relatively few and far between. So as far as the research I've done, I've only found one decent study that kind of tracks marital or relationship happiness before and after having a baby. And it does, to a greater or lesser extent, it does mirror what we have been seeing, which is that over time, relationship happiness does decrease. And that's actually true for people who have kids and people who don't have kids. And it's just, it's the honeymoon period. You love them immensely at the beginning, and then it just all gets a bit routine. Distractions come, they carry on breathing in the same room as you. It's just a simple, absolutely unreasonable. But what this study found, and I think this study looked at more than 150,000 people, they found that people with children experienced a larger drop in relationship satisfaction. And actually it was the mothers with young children that really kind of stood out in that drop in happiness. For mothers with children, less than 40% of them responded as having high satisfaction with their relationship. So way less than half. Whereas for married women without children, it was over 60% responded as having high satisfaction with their relationship. And obviously there's a sliding scale, that's just high satisfaction, and there could be lots of things hidden in the background there. But I think that is telling. So essentially just the presence of a small child is enough to kind of knock the knees out of the happiness of a relationship.
It has a similar trajectory, doesn't it? So roughly a decade after you meet, you have this kind of low where all the kind of the itch kind of, as they say, the 7-year marriage itch equates well to kind of 10-year relationship length.
Yeah.
That kind of comes to a head. Some couples may then separate and go their separate ways, but those that make it through that bottleneck tend to then see relationship satisfaction start to increase again. But as you said, the spectre of having children, for want of a better way of putting it, means that the overall relationship satisfaction tends to just be that bit lower.
Yeah.
There's just that much more strain.
So if my mental calculations are correct, I had my child about 10 years into my relationship. So that's, coinciding now with a low plus a low. That's great. That's great. And you've said you got married after being in a relationship for 9 years?
Yeah, so we met in 2014 and we had Stella in 2025. So we were sort of coasting probably at near the low point. And then just threw a hand grenade onto it.
Yeah, exactly.
To see what would happen.
Yeah, genuinely it feels like that, doesn't it? Yeah, so that's quite interesting in terms of kind of overall large-scale happiness. Interestingly, if you are somebody who is struggling with their relationship and you turn to the internet to go, am I the only person who hates my husband now? Oh my gosh, it's terrifying. Literally, if you go, couples that break up after having a baby, Google's AI summary says, yep, 1 in 5 couples break up after having a baby.
Whoa, that's shockingly high.
That is shockingly high. But in a sense, that's kind of they're normalising and reinforcing, because you're like, okay, well, this is totally normal. Yeah, let's split up. Now, I did a little bit of digging with that because I was like, that is incredibly high. And as with all things on the internet, it is underpinned by really shit research.
Right. Good.
First red flag, the only real story I found about it was reported in The Sun.
Famously high journalistic value.
Yes, I would normally not go anywhere near a Sun URL, but I was like, no, I'm dedicated to the cause. I'm going to find out where this was. And it was actually a study that was commissioned by The Baby Show and a influencer.
Right.
And she surveyed 2,000 people. Now, I can't find that survey anymore, but my suspicion is that those 2,000 people were approached to talk about their relationship changes. Now, when you approach somebody to say, how has your relationship changed? If your relationship has changed, you are going to fill out the survey, right? If your relationship hasn't changed or you don't really feel like you haven't got anything to say about it, then you might not even do the survey, or like you're like, why should I bother talking about this? This is a big problem in kind of questionnaire design, about keeping the questions phrased in such a way as to grant equal weight to either answer. And so, being that it's not from a research institution, it's probably, in all likelihood, a survey that has gone, are you having problems with your relationships? Tell us about it. And so it's going to be attracting a disproportionate number of people who are reporting relationship problems and may have taken them to the extremes.
So you're starting out with a massive sampling bias.
Massive sampling bias. So, yeah, I think there's a big caveat. Do not ever take anything on the internet at face value. But also, it's not as bad as all that. So I've done my own bit of bias sampling. So I don't know if you know, but earlier this year I did the Science Baby Parenting Survey. We've got a fantastic community of people across social media who have written to me and they've told me their stories. And I thought, there's actually so much data here, and I would love to know sort of what there are trends. And my goal is to sort of follow trends over time. But this initial data gathering period, I was interested more in the kind of the mechanics of people's early birth experiences. But as part of that, one of my questions was, is your relationship status different from when your baby was conceived? There was intended to be no right answer in that case. It's like, is it the same or is it different? And it was just yes or no. And so I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but I feel like that is a much more unbiased way of phrasing that question. And the whole survey wasn't about relationships, it was about everything. Obviously, there's limited data that I can get from that, but out of 3,200 people that responded to that survey, only 85 people reported that their relationship had changed in the negative direction.
Wow.
Yeah. And like physically like separated or moved to, you know, living apart or divorced or something like that. So that's out of 3,200 people, 85 people, and that's less than 2.5% of people have experienced a degeneration in their relationships after having children. And I wouldn't say as a result of having children. You know, there's no causality implied there. But, you know, that's a big difference from 20% to 2.5%.
Yeah.
So it just shows how much difference there can be in the way that you ask the question.
Indeed. And even if, you know, you very generously offered up your own sampling as potentially having some bias, which is obviously very difficult to remove, the fact that you're having a wildly different result means that the truth is certainly somewhere in the middle.
Almost certainly.
Definitely not 1 in 5.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and encouraging, I think, as well, because it shows that, you know, perhaps because we're all experiencing these changes and it's natural that things should change, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship is doomed.
Exactly. And the one thing I found to be the most helpful is talking to other mums, because I think there's a certain humility that comes with having a baby and not knowing what the fuck you're doing. That means that my sense of boundaries and privacy have almost entirely evaporated, and I will talk to anyone about anything. And I think that's the experience I've had with other mums. So, you know, we've said, oh God, my husband's breathing's really got on my tits today, or, you know, he said something that really annoyed me. And you wouldn't share that sort of stuff in public, I think, in other scenarios, but there's something about the pressure that comes with having a baby and going through that experience of not knowing how everything's going to turn out that I think gives you a humility that makes you, I think, come together a little bit in solidarity. And I found it very reassuring that, oh, the fact that I want to genuinely murder my husband today is probably not an indictment of our entire relationship. It's probably more the fact that one of us is hormonal and the other one's sleep deprived. Should we just chill out a bit?
Just take a breath.
Moving on from that, you know, there are some very common, if not universal, factors that give rise to this relationship change. And some, there will be relationships where you see some of these or less of these, but there are some general things, aren't there?
Yeah, so I mean, like you touched on yourself, a lot of the things that you did as a couple before having a child is kind of stripped away by the necessities of looking after this tiny baby. And in psychology terms, that's called protective relationship behaviours. They're things that you do naturally in a relationship to keep that relationship running smoothly. And it's things like talking to each other, being intimate, having moments of, whatever your love language is, but having a chance to actually indulge in that. And just spending time, the two of you together. They don't have to be like big, explosive acts of love, but they're the things that keep a relationship on the straight and narrow. And immediately the presence of this needy thing in the house just strips that away. So you're losing a lot of those protective relationship buffers, if you like.
And is it that your investment has to go elsewhere into
Yeah.
the baby?
Yeah, exactly. Because so much time is being taken on the baby, you don't have the chance to communicate in the way that you used to. You literally, like, we've got to a stage now where we literally cannot have a conversation. This is the shittest example, but this morning, Doug and I were trying to talk about pivot tables in a spreadsheet. I was trying to do this Science Baby survey analysis, and he's an IT guy, and I know he has the information. I know he can help me solve a problem. And I was like, please tell me about this. And Felix is screaming over the top of us, Daddy, stop talking to Mummy. It's like, we cannot have a conversation. And that is frustrating. And you can't level your frustration at a 2-year-old that doesn't have a prefrontal cortex and impulse control and doesn't understand. I'm like, he doesn't understand that this conversation will last 1 minute and then he'll have attention again. And again, his bedtime is going on really late. So by the time he's asleep, I'm exhausted. I don't have any capacity to spend time with Doug. At least I'm not, I can put my body next to him, but I'm not there.
That is such a good way of putting it. You can flop your meat suit down in the same room, but
to what end? Because he's just going to have to move it later on. Yeah, it's so the physical draw on our time and our ability to exist that is necessary in bringing up a child means that you have very little time to do that. And the complications of making that time becomes another logistic challenge that pushes everything away. So it's like, okay, we're going to have a night out. Well, we've got to get a babysitter and we've got to make sure that he's fed, he's got all the food, that they know what they're going to do for bedtime, X, Y, Z. So it just adds extra mental load. So I think it does sometimes feel like there's just no quarter for spontaneity.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, spontaneity isn't the word I'd use for this, but an example of this, I think, is the fact that Jake and I have managed to carve out a couple of hours to ourselves in the evenings now. So our daughter is being very good and very reliable at falling asleep and staying asleep, at least for the first half of the night. So I'll get her down and then I can leave the room. Whereas before, when she was a newborn, I was staying with her and going to bed at 8, 9 o'clock with her. But now she'll go down at 7. I can leave the room until either she wakes up, but rarely, or until I actually want to go to sleep like a grown-up at maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
So we've got a lovely tradition now where I kind of sneak into the bedroom that we used to share and we'll watch Netflix for a couple of hours or something. And, it's not groundbreaking intimacy, but it's a couple of hours where we can have a conversation completely uninterrupted, except by the cats. But, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. So, yeah, I mean, and that to us feels very precious and special and must be protected. So I think that is our one protective factor that we've managed to carve out again. And, that will change and we'll have to find another place to do that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that, and the time together is a big factor. I think the other major factor is the kind of disparity in the roles, about the actual people that you are and the roles that you're inhabiting. And a lot of this comes down to, it's talked about a lot these days, mental load. And as I mentioned before, there is unavoidably a default parent in the society that we live in. I think there is always going to be somebody who is going to bear more load of the pre-planning, all of that executive function, and that is an invisible load, and it brings with it a level of exhaustion that I don't believe that the non-default parent can really ever truly grasp. And you can tell them, but then by expressing it out loud, the mental load then changes because there's a resentment that you had to say it out loud. And it becomes the assumption that, well, what you've said out loud is the thing that needs to be dealt with, and then it'll be fine. But that is not the case. It's like you cannot express to them, to somebody else, anybody else, everything that's inside your head. And so there is that necessary kind of identity shift of the person who holds all of that in their head and doesn't feel appreciated for it and cannot ever fully hand over that load without just completely ceasing to be present. And that then, I feel like it leads to a cascade of behaviours that become self-reinforcing, that are damaging to a relationship. So for argument's sake, mum holds in her head everything that baby needs, and dad, again for argument's sake, defers to her for everything. And so she ends up doing it all, or doing a large portion of it, becoming very good at it and becoming very slick at making those decisions and making the right choices. Not that there's ever a right choice, but making choices that will lead to favourable outcomes. And then dad becomes even more reliant on her and incompetent. But then a lot of that is in her perception of his incompetence. Because, and this, it's a phenomenon called maternal gatekeeping, which I've recently learned about, which is just so true of like, the mother will say, well, no, it needs to be done this way. And it will undermine the father's actions. It could take the form of redoing something, like redressing a child after the dad has dressed them in the wrong way. It could be hovering, supervising. It could be niggling, criticising, go, oh no, well, he can't do that, do that. And it is valid in the mother's head because she has thought ahead to the ramifications of every little decision because she's been forced to because of that feedback. But what it leads to is that mum feels under-supported and battled, dad feels underappreciated and like he can't do anything right. And it's just kind of seeding and continually ploughing in this resentment and this conflict in parents.
Yeah, it's so true. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that this is going to be a very bold statement, I think that all of the negative changes in my marriage since having kids are due to the disparity in mental load and associated resentment. So obviously I am the default parent as well. So, you know, I have that whole mental load of, oh my God, the nap maths, and she needs to feed now, otherwise this will happen or that will happen. Whereas Jake will just want a clear instruction that he can then execute and tick that off his list. Mm-hmm. So me, in my weaker moments, become very resentful of that because I'm like, I don't want to be the one who's constantly having to figure stuff out, and I certainly don't want to be the one that then has to articulate that instruction and waste brain power just helping you do what you need to be doing, which is a mental way to look at it, but is the way we all experience this. Then, on the other hand, I know that I am the subject of a lot of resentment because Jake has, again, quite predictably fallen into the role of I am the provider for the family. I need to go and get work. I need to make sure that I can support this family. And that's a whole world of stress that I currently don't have to deal with. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I'm, also financially responsible for the family, but I'm on maternity leave. I have a job right now. It's not to earn gazillions of pounds. And so it's really interesting how the financial stress of having a kid has kind of given us these dual resentments, whereas I'm doing all the mental load of having the kid, which probably does involve some form of maternal gatekeeping, as you've said, but also, Jake resents me that I don't have the mental load of earning at the moment. Mm-hmm. So I think that is going to be where we come together again, is knowing that our roles have become those two polar opposites and that actually we're both doing the very best we can. Mm-hmm. But it is crazy, isn't it, how it just becomes, it does feel, even my choice of the word opposite, I'm not sure makes much sense and
No.
is worthy of interrogation, because they're just two different things that need to be done in a family,
Yeah.
but often are very much at odds. So it's really interesting, isn't it? And I'm sure, you know, obviously as being kind of, you know, a cis couple with male and female generalised roles, that is probably quite a common thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I'd be really interested to hear in, you know, in the future from other people, especially kind of same-sex couples, about how different that relationship plays out. If there is a default parent, or if there's even a, like, perhaps a grappling for who takes those two roles, or if it's something that happens naturally.
Yeah, and indeed whether when they find themselves in their natural dual roles, whether those roles are still gendered or not, or whether that doesn't even make sense anymore.
Do they have dual roles, you know, or are they better at splitting the loads between them? I would feel like no, because the human brain can only hold so much. But
I
yeah.
can smell another survey coming on, Dr. Batterson.
Yep, absolutely. How have you found the assignment of your role within yourself? How has that made you feel?
Um, Utterly devoid of identity,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. I think being the one, and again, this is also a source of resentment, being the one that always has to give up what I'm doing that second in order to see to our baby's needs
Mm-hmm.
means that I very rarely get a chance to do anything for myself,
Mm-hmm.
which is totally fine. I've accepted that, and I think I'm through the worst of it, but I struggled for a good few months with the grief that inspired in me. And I think where that came from is the fact that I thought, gosh, well, this is my life now, and then I'll be dead, and that's it.
Wow. I mean, gosh, you were in a dark place, weren't you?
So I think it's just the grief of you're grieving the freedom you used to have, and I think the illusion that came with that is that I was the only person in the relationship that had made that level of sacrifice and had eroded their sense of self to that extent. I'm sure that isn't true, but it's the sense of who I thought I was doesn't seem to be here anymore, because I've got a much more important job now. That I'm not doing any of those things outwardly that I used to enjoy. So I think I do wonder, oh gosh, well, what is that kernel of me then? I don't know how you've felt.
Exactly the same. Absolutely exactly the same. And this is kind of the third big driver, I feel, of a lot of tension and unhappiness in relationships and in ourselves, is that loss of freedom and that loss of identity as a person. You know, and I mentioned before, when a baby is born, two parents are magically, you know, brought into existence. But parents are people too. And so just being a parent doesn't automatically erase the needs, the desires, the interests, yeah, the kind of interpersonal needs that you had before being a parent. And so it's having those wants and not being in a position to follow through on them. It's not that you resent your baby, but you are wistful, like you say, grieving for the life that you had before, you know, the hedonistic life, as my mum so kindly puts it. And that's where the word hedonism becomes an accusation or an attack, because it's like, oh, all you were doing before was having fun, and now you've got a much more important job. And I'm like, yes, but does that mean that I can never have any fun ever again? And that is a very dark place that our minds, I feel, automatically go to. And I think one crumb of comfort I would offer from my perspective up here at 2.5 years is that as the children's abilities and needs change, your abilities to have fun also change. You can have more time to yourself, but you can also find fun with them as well. So it isn't forever, it is a season, but I know very well from experience, the same experience, that good God, it feels like you are caring for a baby and then you die.
Gosh, and I think we are already starting to see that, is that it's not just that this thing arrives in your house and it takes everything away from you, that actually the net change in happiness ultimately is a positive one, because this thing will give back to you and you will find pleasure in your children. It just takes a little while for that to equilibrate.
Yeah,
That word?
yeah, to get to where it's going.
Yes, thank you.
And I think also we should again be aware of our own echo chamber. We're both in our very late 30s. You know, we've had a hell of a lot of life, both with and without our partners, to live and to grieve now that we can't do it. And I think probably as more people are having children later, there's going to be a bigger fraction of the population that are feeling like we do, that they are giving up on this. Doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but giving up on careers, giving up on social lives, giving up on travel for a period of, you know, a period of this time that the child is young and needy and that you are financially constrained.
And indeed, the fear, which is this is the calculus I was doing when I was in my darkest period, was, oh, by the time, you know, the baby is X years old and will be out of the house or will be at school or will be doing whatever, which will allow me to claw back some more of my identity, I'll be this old. And so I'll be too old for that.
You'll be ancient. You'll basically be, you know, in a care home just staring at a wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you do when you're 55, isn't it?
Oh, God.
And I know, and I do the exact same calculus. Even now, I think, okay, well, by the time I can afford to travel again, I'm basically going to be 60 and incapable. Oh, wait, 60. It's not that old.
No. And we'll be laughing at ourselves. One thing I wanted to touch on as well is I came across a study that challenged the validity of a lot of this in the sense that they decided to look at a non-Western, non-wealthy population.
Mm-hmm.
So basically a lot of this research that we've talked about that try and explain the changes to the relationships that happens after you have kids, they noticed that it's all done in Western families.
Mm-hmm.
And so they looked at a Nigerian population that are much less individualistic and more collective and, in a lot of senses, more traditional human, maybe a more ancient way of living, and found that seemingly marital satisfaction increases with the number of children they have.
Wow.
So they found the exact opposite of what a lot of the earlier research on Western societies are reporting. And again, there may be statistical issues, there may be bias issues with this, and so it may not be reflecting a real difference at all. But I mean, you know, if you think about it, this may make sense in a number of ways, including the fact that a lot of these relationship changes come about as a result of strain on your relationship because you're working together to try and cope with this child and what it's done to your life. But in an individualistic Western society, you just have each other. You don't have the village that we've talked about before that can help you and hold you up when you're tired, sleep deprived, sick, whatever. And so it's important to acknowledge that in this more traditional Nigerian society, they have that. There is a huge emphasis placed on the village, on family, and on that kind of communal support. So it may be that that strain on the relationship is not as pronounced in a more traditional society. And also, really interesting point that this study brought up is that in Western, more wealthy societies, we tend to have a higher degree of social welfare for the elderly. So we have pensions, you know, we have social support, we have sheltered housing. And in less wealthy societies, such as this one that was studied, they have a very low degree of support in old age. And so there is a much greater emphasis placed on care in later years from children and grandchildren. So they're relying much more on the support of their kids as they get older. Whereas in the Western world, we may not be. And so we don't experience that same level of kind of satisfaction and security that might come with having children, because we don't necessarily feel like we need them as much.
It's like it changes the whole family dynamics, doesn't it? By, you know, if you don't have that security in old age, you know, the children have a role early on, and that takes some of the pressure off a partner, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really, I mean, again, there's so much to unpick here and, you know, so much experimental methodology to critique when we talk about a real signal
Yeah.
in terms of cultural differences. But that really blew my mind because, again, you know, I'm sure every single issue we talk about on this podcast, we could potentially come back to the fact that we are not supposed to be living in this way, you know, without a tribe.
Western capitalist nucleated society is poisoning our minds, essentially.
And making it impossible to have children successfully.
It does sometimes feel like walking a knife edge, doesn't it? Of like, yeah, if you do this, then you're going to screw your child over forever, or if you do that, you're never going to earn any money, and you'll have to go and live in the woods. It's
You know, I think we need to get in our closing statement for every podcast, fuck capitalism.
I think we have, to be fair. We've quite naturally hit it every time.
Absolutely.
Given that, you know, anecdotally, questionably, statistically, we in Western societies are having relationship changes that tend to be on the negative side after having children. What should we do about it?
Talk.
Talk.
No, just every relationship is so different, isn't it?
Yeah. There is definitely no one size fits all approach. Even just talking to my antenatal friends, I just think to myself, I don't say this because I do have an element of kindness. I think to myself, well, I wouldn't do it that way, but that's not my relationship. You know, this is why qualified therapists and marriage counsellors exist, and I would definitely say that if you feel that that's necessary, it's necessary in one way or another. One of the tactics that I have learned about is something called a marriage check-in, and this doesn't involve any external people. So if you just feel like you're just grappling with your partner, a sort of marital check-in, again, you don't have to be married for this. You can just be cohabiting with somebody, but like a check-in with the person that you're sharing this responsibility with. And it's literally, even though I said, you know, scheduling takes the romance of everything, this isn't meant to be romance. This is meant to be I see you, I want to know what you're dealing with check-in. And it's literally book in a time. It doesn't have to be an hour. It can just be 15 minutes at the dinner table every Sunday, for example, and say, where are we at? Are you okay? What's on your mind? What's worrying you? What have I done that's aggravated you? You know, but you know, it's reciprocal. Both parties actually get an even footing to say that, because that way, the reasoning behind it is that you get to voice some of these concerns before you're tearing your hair out, the fact that they're breathing, before that resentment has built to a point where you're about to explode. And, you know, if you know that you're going to have a platform to actually say, look, you didn't think about this in advance, and I know that I'm the one that does it all the time, but it's really heavy on me, and I'm, you know, he's had a really bad week of sleeping, whatever. If you get to just talk about that and air it, then it's a chance for you to connect. It's a more formal way that you will have ever done it as a relationship in the past, but it's effective in actually just getting it all out there before it becomes insurmountable.
Yeah, and I think the formality, in our experience, we find this really helpful. The formality cuts off the flame of emotion, I think, and it gives you a safe space to talk objectively about things. And I think from there, you end up with much more generosity and much more goodwill. And that's how you know, suffocate defensiveness, which is really what you're trying to do here, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're trying to be formal and factual, and you can't do that if you're annoyed with the way someone's breathing.
Yeah.
And you can't do that if you're angry. So it needs to be much more structured. And we find this really helpful because we really quite like each other.
Always a good start.
So it's easy, I think, to be nicer to each other when you're not in that pressure cooker of an argument.
Yes, absolutely.
It's easier to be a grown up.
Yeah, and you mentioned goodwill then, and I think I read in a book, it was a psychology book about parenting. Really good book, actually. It's the book you wish your parents had read, and your children will be glad that you did too, which is very difficult to give a shout out to. But Philippa Perry, really fantastic, lots to think about. Quite a difficult read from a personal psychological point of view, but so valuable. But she basically says that bringing goodwill to the relationship and remembering that you are both trying your best is so valuable. And sometimes I have to give myself a little bit of a step back and talking to and go, stop just being inflamed at everything. Like, appreciate that he is trying his best. And, you know, it goes both ways. Just assume goodwill, assume good intentions, rather than they're actively trying to undermine you. And you can already put yourself on that kind of more even footing.
Yeah. Critically, though, it's so difficult to do
So
when you're
difficult.
feeling vulnerable and defensive. It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Which is where the work is.
Absolutely.
Like, it's mad, isn't it? Like, objectively, it all feels very easy. It's like, just do that, and then it's all fine.
No, it is. It's hard work, and it is for me. It's like literally taking a step back and taking a moment and looking at the situation from the outside. I don't mean literally walking out the front door, although that has happened in the past. Like looking out in through the window, but like literally trying to take a mental step back and look at the situation from the outside and go, what is actually important here? You know, does it matter that he doesn't put his pants on? Well, yes, that does matter, but does it matter what trousers he puts on? No, it doesn't matter. Because when everything matters, nothing matters, and it all just becomes a big muddy mess, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I imagine that's something to practice. Like, it's probably something that you get better at it with time and effort, which so that's very valuable.
I'm 2.5 years in, I'll let you know
Yeah,
when it gets easy.
That's it for this episode of the Science Baby podcast.
Just remember, if any of this sounds familiar to you, know that we're right here alongside you. Feel free to reach out and have a good vent, or a bitch.
Join the chat on Instagram, or find this and every podcast episode at thesciencebaby.com.
See you next time.